My name is Lisa Shea, and I'm here with talented, award-winning author Thomas Holliday. This is his latest book in his Chesapeake Bay series called Enemy. So welcome, Tom.
Hi, how are you doing tonight?
All right, I'm doing fine, thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me here.
Thank you. So tell us about your latest book, Enemy.
Enemy is the story of a little town that I write about called River Sunday. And in River Sunday, a variety of things always happen to this town, the things being major conflicting issues in the world, like atomic war or treason, racism, all these kinds of internet, all these kinds of things that we hear about in major cities and major countries. I put them into the hands of a small Chesapeake harbor town and rely upon the characters, which are always different, to deal with this problem and come up with an answer using their own ability as a small town. What fascinates me is how much, through my experience, I've found that simple people, basic people, can have the intelligence and whatever to solve big problems, or at least keep themselves safe around big problems. Now this book, the problem, in each book I write, of course, I pick a major issue. And it has to have enough conflict in it that will put the little town on guard. Raise your sword, on guard, and see how they can solve it. And so it has to be enough conflict. It can't just be something happening off somewhere else. It has to come to the town. And I thought that probably the climate crisis was the biggest thing around, and that lots of people are dealing with it, and lots of people would be interested in how this little town and regular people dealt with it. And of course, in this book, the climate crisis spawns a reaction from nature all over the world. So what they deal with in this town is part of the worldwide issue. Now, you have to keep in mind that when I thought of this story, I started working on this story, I said, you know, all the dystopian stories and all the stories I see are always human beings dealing with other human beings in some kind of crisis. And I thought that it would be, well, not always, but most of the time. I thought it would be much more interesting to see if nature, the other people, the other creatures that we live on the earth with, suddenly became powerful enough to take us on. Well, I knew that in history, human beings had to fight the bison and the dinosaurs and so forth, or at least some of the dinosaurs back in history. But all those animals in nature were gone. It had to be something that still remained in nature that could stand up against humans. And I thought then that the most interesting thing to stand up against humans would be something very small, because something small would take on what a human has best going for it, its size. Well, that led me to thinking of insects. And that's what came up with this story. So you have a small town, a harbor town on the Chesapeake, living in modern times, suddenly dealing with a infestation of insects caused by the climate crisis.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and you brought it to life very vividly, so it was a wonderfully written book.
Well, thank you. I think what's interesting about it is that I write all my books with a lot of research. And my books I'm not adept like some authors that I know, like yourself, who can spin these things out because you have a magnificent brain that can carry all these stories. I have to sit down and work the thing out and read a lot, because unfortunately, all my themes come up with things I don't know anything about.
Mm-hmm.
And when you write a story, you have to sound to the reader like you know what you're talking about. I wrote a story one time. I worked and worked and worked on it, maybe a year, 2 years. I put it out to beta readers. The first time it came back from one of the readers, they said, you know what? On your first page, you had the ship on the wrong tack. I said, oh my God, how could I have been? But that's what you do. And then what the readers will pick up so quickly, because they depend on you to interest them, and they're looking every minute at something you didn't mention that they know about.
Mm-hmm.
And if you get it wrong, you can ruin the whole book for them. So
Right.
you have to do the research. You can make up a few things, and if it's made up enough and cleverly made up, they won't know the difference. But you have to be careful. So you really have to sit down and do the research.
Mm-hmm.
That takes a reasonable amount of time. And this book took about 2 years to think up and fiddle with, because climate crisis in itself is a huge topic.
Yep. Yep.
I have friends who absorb books on the different issues about electricity and coal and God knows what, everything. And so you have to know a lot of that stuff. So that's what I fitted this crisis, this conflict, into my little town model. The small town dealing with something big. And by the way, I'm not the first person that thought of that. I mean, there are a lot of people who write novels that do the same small town. Some of my favorite writers. But mine is a Chesapeake small town,
Mm-hmm.
which is a little different. It's a little different than most of them. So anyway, that's how I got this thing started. And I've been very fortunate that people have liked it and been terrified.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. You bring things to very vivid life in the story. So how did you settle on the Chesapeake Bay as the setting for all of your books?
Well, when and I must say, in recent years, I've begun to develop a collection of stories and novelists that I like. And I've been able to do that because I'm not really a fast eyeball reader. I've done it, and I have to, and I was going through school and so forth, but I don't like it. I'm not like I was back as a teenager sitting on the porch with a copy of the Count of Monte Cristo, taking 4 or 5 afternoons, 4 or 5 months to read the whole thing. I haven't got the time. So fortunately, the discs in my car radio gave me all these unused minutes, and I could read these books that way. And as a result, I've developed a lot of writers that I really like. And I found that the ones that I like the most all have a regional connection. They write about some little place I'd never even heard of before, but they are so enthralling in these vicinities. I can't think of the names of some of my writers that I like. All I can think about is the wonderful Navajo writer who wrote about New Mexico. I can't think of his name at the moment. But so many of them, and the Western writer that we've all seen his movies, and all of his writing about the West and so forth. And all these people seem to have the most success if they wrote about a small region.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, well, the only region that I really know, I mean, I know Maine, and I know a few places I've lived, and I know some foreign countries, but quite frankly, the best place I know is where I grew up.
Mm-hmm.
And fortunately, I come from a family that settled that area back 300 years ago. And as a result, I haven't done anything but hear history since I was a little baby. There was a sword in our front hall that came from my grandfather. And we used to have it, we used to look at it, my brothers and I, pull it out and see a kind of a smear on the tip, a dark section on the tip. And it was always thought that it was a Confederate sword, and that came from one of the Yankees. But of course that wasn't true, but we always thought it was. So you have all this history. You have all the naval battles. I had a cousin who was in the Barbary Wars, and a great, huge story about him. We grew up, we always heard about him. The net result is you hear these stories constantly, and they're true for the most part. A little bit of hyperbole for being a Southerner, and they expand the story to keep everybody drinking. But basically, it's almost a compendium of American history, and even history before that. We had arrowheads we chased around as kids, and all this stuff. So, and you have an area that you know, and you also have the history that goes with it. Everything from witches to all kinds of things. Great battles, the horse jumping over the hedge right out of Faulkner. All these stories that are there, and you can make up a lot of novels out of just the background. And so when you're writing your novel, it's with that kind of background, you can add a little bit in. I wrote a novel back about a black guy who was chased by an evil sheriff back at one of my novels. And the editor who'd just taken over and decided to go into the story and find out the truth about the whole thing has on his wall a painting that came from the earliest days of the or post-Civil War time of another editor. It came with the office, and it was a painting of the battle of some great, I think Cold Harbor, some big battle in the Civil War. And you see both two armies up in the trees. One of the trees is filled with blue soldiers, and another tree is filled with gray soldiers. Out in the middle, you see some of them flipping up side and up down. You don't know what color they are. And I threw that in because obviously it wasn't such a painting, but I threw it in because it added some color to the background of the story.
Yeah.
And those are the things you can do when you have a strong region that has a lot of symbolism you can throw into these things and make the story come more alive to the reader. So that's the reason I picked this area. It's just logical. I copied what a lot of writers are doing. John Sanford writes about the Twin Cities, and he isn't anymore, but he used to. And it's just the way you do. So I copied that from other writers, and I was fortunate to have an area which everybody's written about. All the big writers have written about the Chesapeake, but I like to think that I handled it a little different. I remember when the Chesapeake, the book Chesapeake by Michener was coming out, and I met Michener at a cocktail party down in the town I come from. He was walking around, and I said, you know, if you're going to write about this area, you really should start with the geese. And he said, well, that's something to think about. And lo and behold, when he wrote his book, the first chapter is about the geese. Anyway, not that he got that from me. I just probably seconded his
You never know.
original idea. Well, my father's mentioned in his acknowledgement call, having told him about one of the counties. My father was a great local historian. Like I say, we grew up with all this stuff. So it was natural to be an author somewhere along the line.
In your stories, the environment is almost like its own character. It just comes through very strongly. You do a great job of describing the scenes to bring them to life.
Yes, the environment is fascinating. The environment is probably, well, I like to think about the settlement of the country when it was settled all the way back to the earliest people. We had a people, they say, that came over by the land bridge, not from the Bering Straits, but across from Norway on the ice through to Newfoundland. This is before Eric, the Viking.
Mm-hmm.
You know, 10,000 years before that. They call them, I forget what they call them, but they have a special type of spear point that they made, and they've been found in my area.
Mm-hmm.
And I've often thought that the area I write about is an area that people have sought and tried to conquer since the beginning. It has all the nature you want, all the food you want, the water, the access, the great land. It's built on what's called the Talbot Terrace, which is probably the finest soil for growing anything that exists in the whole country.
Mm-hmm.
It's a sort of a heaven on earth. And that means that you get all this stuff all these people coming in there, all these animals growing there and living there. And it makes, if you're going to write about the area, you got to throw all that in there too,
mm-hmm.
because it's heavy. I personally, in writing my stories, I like the mud.
Mm-hmm.
I've always liked the mud and the swamps, because to me, that's where the water and the land mix.
Mm-hmm.
And you always had the most interesting animals. In Enemy, I wasn't able to do it as much as I'd like in some of my other books, but I got a little swamp in there places.
Yeah. Well, you have the scene of the boys when they're watching the rescue operation.
Yeah, they're over in the marsh grass, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I try to get a little bit of it in there and the animals. And believe me, I am not an expert on animals or any of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I have to work very hard to look up what kind of gull it is or what kind of reed it is, because I don't know what these
mm-hmm.
things are. So that's the research that comes in. Every time you have the characters get together is a scene.
Mm-hmm.
It's a scene. And when you write that scene, you have to be start and finish of a scene, just like people are on a stage.
Mm-hmm.
It's got to all be there. So you really don't. That's
I'll get the
picture.
video started
You
again.
should have that on your compendium. What happened?
Oh, hold on a second. It should come back in a second.
There we go.
Get back?
Yeah.
Well, you could keep the other one. I don't mind looking at that either. As a matter of fact, I think that was one of my ideas, that picture of you. But anyway, so that's the heaviness or the thickness of the nature and land part.
Mm-hmm.
And I really think you have to bring home what this heaviness. I think it's a heaviness. I think somewhere along the line I call it a mist of the past. It overlaps everything.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're a little kid growing up down there, it's like all around you. I don't think they had that in other parts of the country, but
mm-hmm.
they have it in Sutton. I know you have it, but
mm-hmm.
It's heavy down in that Chesapeake area.
Mm-hmm. In your books, you have wonderful characters, and they're very nuanced. They tend to have all sorts of different aspects to them. How do you go about thinking up these types of characters?
Well, that's interesting, because I think when it comes to characters, there was a time, I remember I met a literary agent and I said, I think this thing to selling and writing a novel is a story.
Mm-hmm.
She looked at me and she said, no, it's the characters. Or maybe it's the other way around. I said, I think the thing is the characters. She says, no, it's the story.
Mm-hmm.
But there's New York for you. You never know which way it's going to go. But the characters seem to be a part of this. And I guess it's when I grew up, I like to say, I always used to say at the Hopkins writing seminars to one of my professors, I said, the best way for me to try to write these stories. Of course, in those days, my stories were really atrocious. I mean, really atrocious. But was to take the story and then sit out on the porch with my brothers, 3 or 4 brothers and my sister, and just talk out the theme of it, all of us drinking a beer. And if they really were interested, they asked me questions about it. But if it was a ho-hum, I'd rather listen to the baseball game, then I knew I didn't really have the characters right.
Mm-hmm.
A story is like a joke. A good joke, you have a character in the story, which is really, you want to hear the rest of the joke because you know the character has got something to say.
Mm-hmm.
If you haven't got a character like that, forget the joke. It's not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
So writing the character, when I go through my outline for the story, I really start with who's going to be the character and who's going to be the love interest. And in my idea, they both got to be equal because the men and the women are both strong people.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, who are they going to be? What's their name going to be? I had the guy from Atlantic Monthly who ran the workshops we used to work on. I showed him one of my books one day, and he says, "Tommy, you call him Jim? Give me a break. Can't you think of anything better than that?" And that brought home a point to me, you know, it's got to all be really interesting,
Mm-hmm.
the character. And of course you get down there in the country with the oddball people. Well, no, it's not even there. You can think of oddball characters or fascinating characters from traveling the world, which I've done,
Mm-hmm.
and just, you know, change them a little bit to make them fit. But they are really fascinating people in the world, and people like that. I think you're trying to send me a message with that blue dress. I can't remember. Are you wearing shoes in that or not?
No.
Huh?
So do you think that travel helps you a lot when you craft stories because you have this wealth of knowledge of different types of people that you've interacted with?
I think so. I think that actually travel, but even more than that, it's being in a situation that has some conflict to it.
Okay.
Travel in Africa is much more interesting than travel in London.
Mm-hmm.
When you sit at a cocktail party and everybody's got a holstered gun, and you know outside, and this is the embassy level,
Mm-hmm.
outside is their posse, hey, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't find that in London with a bunch of sots sitting around drinking their special drinks.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the same. I think that when I was in the war in Vietnam, I think that there I probably met what, in my opinion, was the cream of American men and women, because they were both there. They were, I'm sure, ambivalent about the reason they were there, but most important, they were there. And the ones that I hung out with didn't run, no matter what happened. They were not runners.
Mm-hmm.
You could always tell if something went off outside where you were and you turned toward it, you could spot them a mile away. Those are the ones you wanted to be with.
Mm-hmm.
And they were all ages, all types of people, Vietnamese, Koreans, British, Australians. I mean, wonderful people, all with a story to tell, all with a memorable character that you could just as easily put out in the Cowboy West and a cowboy story. In Australia, like a lot of people, I have a great love of Australia. When you walk in a bar and sit down and are leafing through an Australian newspaper to find out what's going on back home, and somebody hears you from about 20 feet away at the other end of the bar and says, "Hey, you must be American. You must be a Yankee." And then I'm set up for the next hour with big, that's the kind of people that you don't forget.
Mhm.
You see them put time and time and time again in the movies and the other novels that you read. Same characters. So there must be something about them that's worthy of copying a little bit into your characters.
Mhm.
That's the kind of stuff you pick up.
Mhm.
And then you've got the normal life here in the States, just day to day of the people you meet through your job and through your experiences. I sold snowmobiles up in chainsaws when I first started out up in New England, northern New England. And some of the people I met out in a trailer, drinking whiskey and talking about hunting deer or whatever.
Mhm.
I mean, you have to remember those characters and you'll put them in a dialogue somewhere.
Mhm.
I think those are the things that pack into that brain of yours.
Yeah. Yeah.
When I write my stories, I write into my present schedule.
Yeah.
I get up in the morning and I sit with a coffee by my window and check out all the birds flying around and stuff. And then I'll go out for my walk later. And I have a notepad that I have different stories I'm working on, and I start writing down concepts and ideas. And it's amazing some of the scenes you work out that way. That some of the characters that come to your mind
Mhm.
that you hadn't even thought could be in a story. And they come right to life. And they turn out to be these oddball characters. Like, I think in this one you had the guy with the Canon in his front yard.
Mhm. Yeah.
I mean, these are people that you know so well.
Mhm.
And you just make them fit in the story because that's where they belong.
Mhm.
And I actually knew a guy who had a French 75
Oh, wow.
down in the area.
Mhm.
And he drank that same kind of champagne 20, 30, 40 years ago, I know him.
So it seems to say that the more experiences you gather up in your life, the more that you have a library in your head to work from when you're crafting a story.
I don't think that you can write good fiction, the kind that I think will keep somebody tuned to it, unless you've been there and
Mhm.
you've done something. Now, you want to write about Afghanistan, you've never been there, well, at least you've been in Vietnam. It's all the same. Wars are wars.
Mhm.
You've got to go out and risk your life to get these experiences. And if you don't, if you're not willing to do that, you want to sit back and make up stuff that you don't know anything about, people are going to spot it's fake. So there's a lot of fake stuff in it. I remember in your case, you spent what, 2-3 years learning how to fight swords.
Yeah.
And then you went to England and walked all over monasteries and things. I mean, that's the kind of stuff you have to do.
Mhm.
If you don't do it, your characters are going to stink. You know, they just do. They don't feel right.
Mhm. Well, and a challenge in modern times is that so many people get obsessed about a particular area that if you get that area wrong, they're going to see the faults in what you've done.
Absolutely. And of course, you have to be a good liar too, because I grew up in an area where I hesitate to say the South because my area was sort of a line area, but we say in the South, if your family was at the surrender, you were a Southerner. Well, maybe that's the kind of area it was. But there's a lot of kidding around and expanding the story and massaging it and making it bigger than it was. And I think that goes with writing fiction too. You've got to be able to massage the story a little and make people believe you really know what you're talking about. But you still got to do the basic research.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, who knows how birds fly? I mean, or I had a cat in one of my stories that swam rivers.
Mm-hmm.
You know, hey, do cats swim? Well, I looked that up on the internet, and maybe some do. But if you make it up in your story and you make it real enough, people are going to believe that this particular cat swam.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of tall tale you put in there.
Mm-hmm. So I know something you've talked about in the past is that you write in 3 acts. Can you talk a little about that?
Yeah, definitely. Well, in my opinion, the earliest stories were talked around campfires by the cavemen and cavewomen. And I think most of those were probably jokes
Mhm.
or hunting tales. And in time, they expanded them and made them into great things about the gods and whatever. In time, religion came along and they had the religious festivities. And all these things were kind of like plays or acts. If I was a better scholar, I'd probably get the dates right on this, but that degenerated or changed into the plays that they made in London and all these cities, like which we know now that the Shakespearean plays, that's what they became.
Mhm.
And in the Greek writings, they were the same. And I believe that a lot of them followed similar play setups to introduction, massaging of the conflict, and conclusion, where either somebody gets killed or whatever. Well, that's three acts. And when I was going through looking at literature and so forth, it seemed to me that three acts were the way it went. And when you write a novel, you always have in the back of your mind that maybe they'll come through and make a movie out of this.
Right.
Well, movies are based upon screenplays. Screenplays are in three acts for the most part.
Mhm.
So it seemed logical as I began to work this thing out that writing in a novel with three acts, each act made up of 8 chapters, 24 chapters in all, with each chapter having, and the character has to change, and all these things that make it a target in the story. And in the middle, you massage it, you get it thicker and thicker and thicker. So you got to find out what happens in the third part, which is the ending. And it just happened that I worked it out with 24 chapters. I suppose you could do it with a lot more.
Mhm.
Some writers write one chapter after another. There's no act two, whatever. But that's the way I like to set it up,
Mhm.
because I just like it organized. And it allows me to work on a chapter 24 when I haven't even finished chapter 4.
Mhm.
I can move around a lot, which again helps me to think of better ways to do something in an earlier chapter. It's just the way I work it.
Mhm.
Otherwise, you end up getting stuck and you can't figure what's going to happen next, or the character isn't fitting this or whatever.
Mhm.
So that's the way I came out of this. And now I've done 10 books with that format. And I've taken old stories that I wrote 30 years ago and put them into that format, and it works.
Mhm.
So Powerboat Racer, I wrote 20, 30, 40 years ago, and it's completely changed because of the 24 chapters, and it's much better. With a lot of the old characters. I mean, I just pulled out and started to write them over again.
Mhm.
But that's helped me. I figure I've got another 3 good books in me, and by the time I'm done, I'll get to the last one and won't be able to finish the final chapter. But at least somebody will come and find, well, here's 18 of them. I wonder what he's going to say next.
You've got plenty more years left on you.
I don't know. We'll see.
Like I said, we have a 98-year-old member in the writing group, so
Yeah.
you've got lots of time.
And Smuckers, I've got to tell her about Smuckers.
Mhm.
That's the people that put you in it if you're 100 years old.
Okay. Well, she's got 2 years left to go.
Yeah. But anyway, that's sort of the way I funnel the thing around. And one of the interesting things about it all is that I do this stuff with a computer that's not very up to date. And I often wonder if I really got a novel out there that made a lot of money, maybe I'd go out and buy one of these fancy new iPads or something.
Oh, but then it'll just be more confusing. So
yeah, that's my trouble. I haven't got the technology to think it up. My novels, I'm stressed so much in trying to write, and I do think in novels today have to have technology in them, because if you don't have technology, people are just not interested.
Mhm.
And so to write the technology for the stories that you want to write. It's like writing a story about racing cars. You got to know how the damn engine works. Otherwise, they're not going to believe you. And today, technology is so complicated that I'm working on a story right now that it requires me to know about writing algorithms and to make robots work. And I'll tell you something, that is complicated stuff. But on the other hand, it's really very simple. So if I can just figure out a way to say it simply, like he grabbed all the wires and it started working.
Right.
Rather than trying to explain every little buttons in there and how he wrote the algorithm and, oh, he wrote it wrong here, this part, it should be changed to this. Maybe I can get away with it. But it's got to have that because that's what people want to read now.
But I think people really like the stories that you write because they have a grounding in them in the Chesapeake Bay and in people who are on the water and understand boats and understand all of these other kinds of things. And you bring them to very strong life because of your own knowledge of these areas.
Yeah, I had one story which I forget what novel that was, but it required something that I have to this day never figured out whether it could really have happened or not. The bad guys are taking off on this huge airplane and there's a cargo door and it's gradually moving up above the ground. And this heroic dog who spots his master tied up in the back of the thing, which the hero is in there trying to get him out and loose. But the dog's on the land and spots his master up there. And he makes this jump from the ground up to the cargo plane as it's moving away and grabs a hold of the leg of the bad guy.
I think that might have been Terror Flower.
Yeah. And I've often wondered whether a dog could jump that far. So far, I haven't had a reader come back and say anything. And by the way, that one's doing very well in the page reads.
Oh, great, great.
You never know what people are going to read when they get into that reading thing.
Yep.
So it's very, the sales aren't there, but the readings are good, which means the same thing. So, but I often wonder whether somebody's going to come back to me, Tommy, Chesapeake just can't jump that far.
Okay, this was a special one. It had the adrenaline rushing. People lift cars off of their babies because of the adrenaline pumping through them. So,
like that story of yours about the Korean woman or the Korean guy meeting on the shoreline or something somewhere, and would they have said that or not? I mean, it was perfect, but then you got to say, do Koreans actually say that? It works. These are the problems you have in writing stories.
Yep.
You remember that story?
Yep.
Something.
The Counterfeit Lighthouse.
Is that what it was?
Yes.
It's a good story.
Oh, thank you.
So anyway, but that's what happens to these stories.
So in Enemy, you have a much darker tone than in many of your previous stories. And you have some scenes that are very adrenaline filled.
Yes.
I don't know how much of the story you want to give away, but
well, you mentioned that you were going to ask me about tension.
Yes, exactly.
Leading up to tension, and I thought about that, and I said, how can I? Well, I had a review on my book. It gave away the whole plot of the story.
Well, yeah, you can't control reviewers.
If it was a movie, they'd have a picture of the things, but this doesn't really give the story away, but it gives you an idea of writing terror, at least as far as I know. As when I started years ago, or when I was experimenting with writing, I wrote a lot of humor. And in humor, you have to get a laugh, but there's a trick to get a laugh out of a drawing. And I remember in one of the books I read, he said, one of the funniest things that you could ever possibly do in a cartoon was to have a nonchalant guy with a funny looking face walk along and slip on a banana peel. He goes flying on the ground And you laugh and laugh and laugh, and everybody laughs.
Mhm.
And it went on to explain why everybody laughs at that. People laugh at that because they say that guy was really stupid. And the reason you say that is because you're happy it didn't happen to you.
Mhm.
It's you weren't that stupid.
Mhm.
And that's why you laugh so hard. And it's a very simple experience. Banana peels are everywhere. You don't have to go make it fancy drawing or anything. Just put a banana peel out there and have the guy slip.
Yep.
And you get a laugh. Well, I thought of one little part in this thing that kind of sums up all the things of getting suspense or terror for a reader. In about chapter 6, and this is assuming the reader still doesn't know who the bad guy is, but they even if they knew, were waiting till somebody spotted it. So even if you knew what you're looking for, they're waiting to see what these humans, how stupid are these humans? They don't see it.
Right.
So it starts out, it's basically a chipmunk is standing on a little perch he's built for himself next to the ruins of an old church, fallen bricks and so forth. He's just standing there. It's not quite morning. It's still dark, but he's there and he's starting to look around. And he sees up in the trees above him, one is a big woodpecker. And the woodpecker's moving his wings a little bit. And way up the top of the tree, he sees a hawk. And he knows that hawk is looking at him, but it's far enough away so he'll have time to get back under the bricks. So he makes a grunt, which chipmunks do, because he wants to call to his girlfriend who's across the little field in front of him. She comes out on a rock every morning, and he makes this little chortle to get her attention. Well, for some reason, and he doesn't know why, this morning she isn't there. So he thinks about that and he wondered why isn't she there? She's always there. And the clouds are the sky is starting to lighten up. So he says, oh, there's something moving underneath me. That's strange. Sitting on the dirt and there's something moving under me. And then he starts to think about that a little more. And he realizes that this dirt around him is starting to get higher. Either that or he's getting lower. Then he notices the woodpecker flap his wings and fly away. That's strange. And then as he gets lower in the ground, he notices that there's this stick-looking thing coming up out of the ground. And he says, that's strange. And all of a sudden, the thing stabs him in the eye, and he can't see through that eye. And he says, oh, with his other eye, he notices that the hawk has started to flap his wings and is moving away. So he says, well, then he sees 4 of these little characters get up and he says, oh my God, what are these things? Is it like what the other animals have been telling me about? And suddenly he notices that his other eye has been stung and now he can't see anything. And then he's getting deeper in the ground. He feels the dirt around him. And all of a sudden he notices that his hair is disappearing from his skin. And something has gotten into his mouth. And it's going into his body. And he can't understand this. And then gradually he knows that he's done for. And that's, I don't remember all the words because I wrote it a different way slightly, but it's the idea of this creeping terror. And the reader, I think, liked those things.
Yes, it was a very powerful scene that you crafted there.
Yeah, it's creeping on you. Now, that's not the biggest scene in the book.
Mhm.
It's just a little chipmunk, but people love chipmunks.
Mhm.
People love, you are barefoot. People love chipmunks. It's a big deal to them. And if you get something loving, it all of a sudden reaches this horrible death. I mean, the average person who's reading that thing is going to want to hear about the chipmunk getting through to his girlfriend.
Mhm.
That's what you're expecting.
Yep, right.
So that's how to write terror, and taken from an old cartoonist who
Mhm.
learned how to write something funny. None of my cartoons were ever as funny as a banana peel, but
Did you find it hard to write the scary scenes?
no, I don't know why. I think a scary thing has to be something that you don't expect.
Mhm.
And what you're seeing is, in this little town, is you're seeing the people putting up an obvious defense. They're convinced they're going to win.
Mhm.
Just like that section about the damn guy cleaning the floor.
Mhm.
You know, he didn't have any more of an idea. He's going along running his vacuum cleaner.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, there's something happens and boom, he's done.
Mhm.
So you have to be taken completely by surprise.
Mhm.
If you're not taken by surprise, it's not going to work. I don't write, most of my stuff is not written that ferociously.
Mhm.
You know, it's an archaeological dig and, oh, here's something we found, it's a pipe. You know, you don't get that excited. But this thing, when you're writing horror, it's got to be really hammering you.
Mhm.
And I find it fun to write. I could never, I don't know whether I'll ever write another terror story, but
Mhm.
this just happened to fit perfectly.
Right. Well, and I think that it helps that you had typical average people in these situations, that you could imagine yourself being in that situation and running into the same challenges that these people face.
Yeah, and if you had a PhD from MIT who's walking along with a magnifying glass, it ain't going to work.
Mhm.
Got to have, but on the other hand, the characters are just ingenious enough. And this guy's driving around in a steam car.
Mhm.
Never heard of that happening, you know?
Mhm.
So there he is. He's obviously a bright guy, and he could think of something to survive. But the average little town will have some that are like that and some that are regular, some that don't go much further than knowing how to drive a truck.
Mhm.
But they all come up with something that's their defense,
Mhm.
which makes it interesting. You look at what's this guy going to do that the other guy didn't do, or is he going to beat the system? Which is really what it comes down to. Is he going to beat the system?
Mhm. Well, and in many of the scenes that you have, it is just people trying to live their lives, like someone just trying to go to the cemetery
Yeah,
to
exactly.
to spend some time there. They aren't thinking about other kinds of scary things, and then they're just overwhelmed by forces beyond their control. And I think that's something that readers can relate to, that they could just be going
Yeah.
out to the grocery store and something like this would happen without any warning.
Well, that's the thing. It's you're not in the in Morocco dealing with Gaddafi's men.
Mm-hmm.
People, when you get into those stories, like the great Israeli writer, I can't think of his name now, and all this spy stuff. He fixed the paintings. I can't think of his name. Anyway, those stories, you expect it to be guns, explosives, driving cars, somebody who knows karate, XXX. He can do, you know, this is just regular people. And I think I had one thing there, one of my stories, I had a fist fight. Now I trained in some of that stuff, not to be an expert, but I trained in it. And I've always thought that it's good to read about it. And we all know what's his name, has done a great bunch of novels about fist fights. I can't think of the name of the guy, but he's done some wonderful stuff. And, you know, the guy out on the highway that just carries his toothbrush and city, I can't think of it. Tom Cruise did in one of the movies.
Mm-hmm.
Jack something.
Reacher?
Jack.
Reacher?
Yeah, Reacher.
Mm-hmm.
Now that story, I mean, it's the beauty of it is that there's some brilliance to it, but it also these incredible fights.
Mm-hmm.
It's beautifully done. The guy faces three guys. How did he do it? And you get this pitch and what he hits and everything. And I mean, I've had, I think, one fist fight, and one or two fist fights that I worked at, just like Reacher does.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I read his story, how he fits his, he figures out all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But it's hard to get it right.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't hit somebody a certain way, it's not going to work. And somebody's going to read it and say, hey, that's wrong.
Right. That's a problem.
But you got to get a fist fight right. You got to hit the guy right. I had one right cross, it, or it was a hook. It knocked the guy backwards in one of my stories. And it was done right.
Mm-hmm.
The guy smashed into the wall, and a big tough guy. And I knew I could get away with it, but I had to write that scene several times to get the fist just right.
Mm-hmm.
Because people know how to hit people, and you got to do it right. And so, but that's the kind of stuff that you need to do. It's, you know, if I remember back in the writing seminars a long time ago that this wonderful lady that I knew there, she was writing a short story, and she had somebody shoot somebody, and she had a pistol, a revolver, that didn't have enough bullets in it.
Okay.
And I raised my hand. I said, you know, you should have this number of bullets. She said, oh my God, I didn't know that. And that's unfortunately the way I am, and it aggravates people. But
I don't think it's a bad thing. I think that you have to warn someone up front, because if they publish that book with that kind of incorrect detail, they're going to just get all sorts of one-star reviews on them.
Yeah, well, it behooves you to research.
Mm-hmm.
I offered to go down to Maryland one time and give a story. I give a talk, which I couldn't do. I couldn't get away for it. Mm-hmm. But on research, because I think the key to writing novels, whether you're going to be famous or not, doesn't make any difference. You're going to be right. Mm-hmm. You've got to do the research, and it means you're going to have to take, for my kind of stories, you're going to have to take a couple of years to figure these things out, because when one of my books, I forget which one it was, but it was about a swamp, Easter Sunday. Mm-hmm. And it was about muskrats.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I don't know much about muskrats. And I literally went to Maryland and went to one of the huge swamps and spent a whole afternoon with the game wardens there, talking to them about muskrats, looking at muskrat trails to figure out the story. Mm-hmm. And I even had pictures that showed an island with the pine trees in it, just the way I could copy and put into my book to make it work. And I mean, that's the kind of stuff you got to do.
Well, and in Easter Sunday, the environment plays such a powerful role in it, and what the hero is struggling against, that you brought that to amazing life, and your research really shines in that.
Yeah, it's kind of, but it's fun. Mm-hmm. To me, writing is fun. Somebody said to me, "Oh, you do this, you do that," and I said, "No, it's fun." You're John Dos Passos. I forget, a World War II, 1950s writer. Mm-hmm. I think that's his name. But he said he did a lot of those novels for post-war novels, like On the Terrace and some of those things. Mm-hmm. He said, writing is like going into another personage. Mm-hmm. A writer lives in his characters, in his stories. And if you don't, forget it. You're just trying to make money. But if you live in your stories, it's like you're taking a vacation, and you live with these people. Mm-hmm. And when you finish one of these things, it's like you got to go take a shower. You're sweating because it's been so much fun.
Mm-hmm.
When Dickens wrote A Christmas Carol, it said, I don't know how true it is, it said that he lived in a garret up on the top of someplace. And I don't know if he was making money then or not, I can't remember. But he wrote the Christmas Carol, and he went down out in the street to people walking by and held up his notes and said, this is a good story. Here's the part I want to read to you.
Mm-hmm.
I was so excited about that story.
Mm-hmm.
And I always remember that Dickens. I think if you go through life and you find something that you really love to do,
Mm-hmm.
and you sort of half-assed know how to do it, that you would probably accomplish the best thing in life there is, which is to do something and leave something behind you that hopefully, other people will read. I go up to the Athenaeum I used to go up there a lot, and I'd see these rows of novelists.
Mm-hmm.
Nice paper-bound or nice hardcover novelist books.
Yeah.
From the 1920s and the 1890s and stuff. And I think, Jesus, there's some guys that wrote those things and they thought about them just like I'm thinking about these.
Mm-hmm.
I doubt that anybody's picked up one of those things in the last 50 years. But I got the original copies of 3 or 4 of the original Dr. Dolittle books,
Mm-hmm.
which I love.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, some of these guys get read again and again and again. That just happens to some of us. So if my stuff is good enough to keep another generation excited about the Chesapeake, well, I'll be happy.
Yeah. Well, and inspired to write their own stories.
Yeah, and whatever. But if you're going to be a writer, you got to, I think that idea of living the story and being part of it is key. I think you're never going to have any fun otherwise. I don't know whether Patterson gets any fun out of writing all his books.
I would hope so.
I hope so, because he certainly seems to have great characters, and he seems to know something about them,
Mm-hmm.
Which is important.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we have reached the hour mark. So
Okay.
Do you have any words that you'd like to share for aspiring writers to help them get motivated?
No, I think just enjoy it. And I think writing by hand is a good idea. I think writing down something by hand, even if it's just a part of a scene, the hardest thing then for me is to take that handwritten thing and type it on this infernal machine. But it's a lot easier than when I had back in the old days if I had a typewriter.
Right. Yeah.
Of course. And then the other thing is with these computer things, as you know, I'm a great fan of AutoCrit. And what that does, among checking your spelling and all that stuff, is it will tell you about the progress in the story.
Mm-hmm.
It's moving properly. That's a good thing a computer can do, because you can't, it's hard to do it when you're looking at the book as a 200 page or 250 pages to see how it all fits together.
Mm-hmm.
A computer like AutoCrit, they can go through and say, okay, this section slows the whole damn thing down.
Mm-hmm.
But they've got pace. They could tell you about pace. Pace is so important. You have to keep it running. So I highly recommend that, because I don't think, unless you get a really, I don't even think it's an editor's job. I don't think an editor can pick it up. Mm-hmm. It's got to be a computer that can take the whole book and think about it. An editor can help you with spelling and format of a paragraph or something like that, because it's something that they can get a hold of. Mm-hmm. But I think only the writer can really sense this pace thing. Well, maybe a good editor can do it too, but a computer, this AutoCrit has helped me a lot on that pace thing. It's where you go in and you go in a scene or something, and you think it's so great, and then the computer says, no, it isn't. It doesn't belong here. Take it out. That kind of thing is very hard to do. Mm-hmm. So I throw that out, AutoCrit, or I got AutoCrit, it was the only one on the computer. Now there's about 20 of them.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. You probably use one. Everybody I know uses one somewhere. They're not that great on anything but what I just said. Spelling
Mm-hmm.
and multiple use and repeating yourself. And if you use the same, I know I caught you on one of those. Everybody does it. What was that thing I caught you on? Something, I forget.
Well, I think people get fond of certain phrases and then they just habitually use them without realizing that they just used it a few minutes ago. So.
Oh, the computer will pick those up.
Right, right.
But it aggravates you to have to use the computer. But that's what you have to do because it's just too much. Now you can go out and buy a whole book.
Mm-hmm.
Computer will set the whole damn book up. Here's the characters, put them in a story. I will say one other thing, just as an aside.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about where stories come from. And as these stories went along, it became more and more plays and stuff like that. The Greeks, who were the first who really thought of any of this stuff, because they were the first people who could really write anything. And you got to allow for the Christian, like Christ and so forth, where they had little parables. They were sort of wonderful stories too, but in those days they had to have parables because that's the only way people could remember something. They could repeat parables. They probably couldn't repeat poetry, but the Greeks were famous for these plays. And I think I read somewhere, and maybe you know the answer to this, but I think there were 22 different formats for the plays.
Okay.
22 different ones. And the one that was most popular in the Greek days was a stranger coming to a town and cleaning the town up from bad guys and having a love. I think it was a guy usually, and finding a love. And that format became one of the most successful. It's in all the Shakespeare, almost all the Shakespeare things. It's something people can grab a hold of. And in this country, we have it in our Westerns, which is why I love Westerns, because it always follows a story. I might say some of the new actors redoing some of the old stories aren't quite as good as some of the old, because the old use much more casts and much more interesting characters. The modern ones, they have budgets, so they can't have a lot of supplemental characters. But the old ones, you look at Red River, and I mean, and the guy who taught me about writing from Atlantic Monthly had it right on his shelf, the Red River movie. But it has so many characters in there that build out the story, and yet it's still one guy cleaning out the whole thing and being the hero right to the end. There's Tombstone, the big hit.
Yep.
Tombstone's story has been done since I'm distantly related to Doc Holliday. Been called Doc. Me and my brother's been called Doc all the years we were in. Tombstone is the latest version of it, but it's still one guy coming to the town, getting the bad guys, walking off with a girl. Tombstone, right there. And I forget another book mentioned it as being the book to read about the West. Who is it? Nora Roberts. Nora Roberts had a wonderful horse story. And she mentioned to the boyfriend, well, let's see, I'll set you down with Tombstone first or something. That was the big thing. But that's something I mentioned it because I have seen so many writers write books that don't follow that format. And I don't know. I think they missed something. The hero. You could have a beautiful girl be a heroine, which I think you do in some of your stories, but it's the same format. Somebody goes in strong, goes in and cleans up the whole mess and has a romance as it ends. That's what people like. And there's nothing the matter with that. Because that's great as long as you put it into a format that is really guts and heavy and solid. your characters go into sword fights. I mean, they got to do something that's tight, you know, rather than I had a girlfriend in high school and it's not the same.
Yep. Yep. I understand. All right. So where can people find Enemy if they want to read their copy?
I do everything on Amazon.
Okay.
So you go to Amazon and you can get it in ebook. Occasionally I'll put on one, it's a free ebook, and paperback. And I just talked to my narrator, sent a copy to my narrator who I've used on my other books. He's very excited.
Great.
Possibility that he'll do The Enemy after he reads it.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see, and we'll keep our fingers crossed, but he's a wonderful narrator. So I'm hoping I can get him.
Yeah.
Then you'll be able to go on there and you'll see the audio too.
Great. And where can people find you on social media?
Oh Lord, Instagram. Oh, I didn't put that down here. YouTube, I'm on YouTube at Thomas Holliday.
Mm-hmm.
And YouTube, I have a lot of my drawings, a lot of my critical reviews of other books, readings from several of my books. Twitter, just look up my name or Solar Sippers. I have a book blog. If you go on WordPress and look up Chesapeake Writer Blog, you'll find me in there with comments and reviews. The best one of all this stuff is to go on, when you look on Amazon for my book, and then you hit my name underneath the name of it, you'll have a chance to go to my author page. And when you go to the author page, you'll have copies of all the interviews I've done on TV and radio and lots of stuff. As I say, you can register with me on Twitter or Facebook. Facebook is T. Holliday. And if you register or join my pages, then you'll get my daily comment about something, whatever it is. So right now I'm doing research on farming. I've never learned as much about farming and I just sent a note out to one of my friends who does a lot with climate change. He's trying to get us all to go down to the legislature and vote for the carbon tax.
Mm-hmm.
I sent her a note from my farming thing about what farmers think about the carbon tax, and maybe she'll listen, but I doubt it. Anyway, it's interesting.
Well, that's great.
What do you know? You're working on you're getting ready for Salem, right? Basically.
Yep, I'm getting ready for Halloween. Halloween is coming.
Well, you've got that wonderful scared cat, which I love, and I own a copy of it. And then you have your I want to say Viking stories, but they're not. They're English, I guess, right?
Yep, got a couple of different sets of stories that are either set in Salem or set with spooky kinds of topics.
You have the wonderful series, Know Thyself, and all those ones that are, I guess, most of them are now on Audible, aren't they?
Yep, they're getting there.
Those are, if you like the medieval times, and I do. Since I was a little kid, once again, I had heard nothing but how my namesake was with Wallace. And then another one was had a team of archers at Agincourt, and I just, hear this stuff over and over again. You say, how the hell do they stay alive long enough to give birth to another generation? But those stories are great.
Yep, they are.
And you write them because what's so interesting about your stories is that when you get into historical stories, you realize that people in those times were almost identical to people today. Right. You even have the back of one of your books, which I read with great interest, about the terms that they used in those days and what they mean today. And a romance, they have the same meaning, they just say it a different way.
Yep.
And the characters are just, I mean, they're just like right out of, well, I guess that girl you write about is like a graduate of high school. Actually, they're younger, probably about 16, something like that. She wasn't much older because they were very old when they were young, so to speak, in those days.
That's true.
And but she is just a pleasure to read about.
Oh, thank you.
And accurate. And you can just see the same person in the 30s or the 50s or the 80s in this country. Same exact thinking and thoughts. As I remember, she loved her horse.
Mm-hmm.
How many women do I know that love their horses?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've met them all my life. And that just, you do a good job with that, I think.
Okay.
You make medieval times come alive. And I highly recommend that to anybody writing about the past.
Oh, you're very sweet. But no, we're here today for Enemy by Thomas Holliday. Make sure you find it on Amazon, paperback and Kindle version. And thank you very much for Tom for coming in and talking with me.
Thank you, Lisa. Look forward to your next book.
All right, I'll talk to you soon.
Bye.